the SQL ODBC task, I think people who know Universal Automation Center know that we have an SQL task for a long time in the system, but the SQL ODBC task can do much more because it can connect to any SQL or to any ODBC database. And this is basically most of the databases today on the market. So you can connect to Amazon Redshift, you can connect to SAP HANA, you can connect, of course, to MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, and so on. So to all these different databases, you can connect using this generic task. And this task actually has a lot of different connection types. So you can say you can connect with a dataset name. For example, if you've set it up on Windows, you can connect via the connection string, or you can connect via file DNS. So you can see here on the screen the different database types which I have configured on my system. So there's MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, SAP HANA, ODBC-compatible database. And I will also show you the task in action. The nice thing is what you can do is also you can have different output types. So you can say, just write the output to the standard out of the task, or write it to a CSV file, so on the disk, or write it in JSON format. This JSON format option we have now in all the new integrations. This is nice if you want to process later on the data. What's also interesting is that if you write something to the output, you can define also how much lines you want to write, because maybe you don't want to write 10,000 lines to the output. You maybe just want to write the first 10 lines. So this you can also define. And you can define also the separator for the CSV format. Last thing is the observability. This I'm going to show you also in a second. So observability, what does this mean? So maybe if you've seen other Stonebranch Online so far, is that we are now collecting metrics data on all the integrations which we are executing. And this metrics data is things like about failed task statuses, about successful task statuses, how many tasks we ran, how many lines have been extracted by an SQL task, for example. So all kinds of different information, we are collecting them now, saving them in the Prometheus database, and then we can display it, for example, via Grafana or any of the dashboards you're using in your company. In my case, I'm using Grafana because it's free and I can nicely use it to monitor the stuff. Okay, enough slides. Let me go to the demo. So let me go to the SQL task. Click on it. So that's this new SQL task. So what you need to do is you need to first select the action. So in this case, I want to run an SQL script. In this case, I'm connecting to a Redshift database. So I say, Redshift, I put here my Redshift credentials. I choose my Redshift connector. So this is like with the other one, with the task that you saw before. Here you see now all the drivers. In this case, I use the driver for Amazon Redshift. Of course, I could also use a HANA driver if I want to connect to HANA, or SQL Server, and so on. In this case, I want to connect to Amazon Redshift, so I choose my Amazon Redshift driver. And you see, this means always dynamic. No? So it connects to the server and then retrieves the data for selection. Then you can select the output options. So in this case, I want to write the extension output. That means I write it as a JSON file format, the output, and I want to write it in the standard out. I will not write it to a file in this case. I could also write it to a file. And this is something new, which I'm going to do. I'm also can also look into the data for observability. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the column total revenue, and then I'm actually summing up the value of this column. So like this, I can do quality checks on the data using my metrics, observability metrics. You will see this in a second. Okay, let me start this task. So you can see it's running. So now if I go to the retrieve output, I said I want to have JSON and output format. So I go to my standard output. What you can see here is the standard out. You see nicely formatted. So these are the states. This is the revenue. And you will later on see in the observability that I'm summing up the revenue of the total revenue column. And then you have the output as JSON format, which is nice for processing. No? So you can see here the data in JSON format, and also nice to process in newer tools like these synapse, for example. Okay, so what you've seen here is that you can connect to any kind of ODBC database. You can define the output format that you want to do is, and you can also set metrics which you want to measure in your HANA dashboard. So let me now go to Prometheus. So what you can do is I'm collecting all the metrics in the Prometheus time series database, and these are the different metrics that I'm collecting. You see there are lots of them, and you can see there are some metrics related to the universal controller, some metrics related to the universal agent, so the number of jobs, the number of active connections. For the controller, I'm checking the total history, created the total history, and so on, the license data. But, and that's the nice thing, I'm also collecting specific things to integrations. In this case, we are talking about the SQL ODBC integration. So I'm, for example, collecting the number of rows which I've extracted, or the number of duration an SQL statement took. So all kinds of information I can now measure. And then once I have this in the Prometheus database, I can use my Grafana dashboard. And this is my Grafana dashboard for the SQL task. The nice thing is this Grafana dashboard comes now out of the box in the integration hub. So in the integration hub, you can download directly the dashboard for your Grafana dashboard, import it, and then you have the data available. So for example, here I'm saying the number of failed tasks per task. So for example, there's one failed Amazon RDS selects task. There's one Redshift task which have been failed. Then I'm showing the task instances per status, failed, so on. I'm showing the number of rows I've extracted. Maybe you've seen I've extracted 5 rows. This is why you see here the 5. If I go a bit back in time, you can see there, for example, the task which has extracted 24 rows. So this is nice. So it's, let me go back to the last 5 minutes or last, let's say 30 minutes, give some more information. And then actually we said we look into the data. So that's what we are doing here. Maybe I go to the last 15 minutes or last 5 minutes. Let me just check, that's even better. Okay, so then you can see this is actually the revenue which has been summed up by the SQL task. So altogether the 5 states calculated revenue of $803,000. And like this, I can monitor also SQL statements. So if I see there's no revenue or there's too much revenue, then I know maybe something is wrong. And you can see there are all kinds of metrics that you can measure.